They say a thief only needs one mistake, but that's not true. Sometimes all they need is one package they were never supposed to touch. The soft thump of a delivery box landing on my front porch echoed through the quiet cul-de-sac at exactly 5:42 on a warm Thursday afternoon. I watched the notification flash across my phone while I was finishing a video conference upstairs. The UPS driver waved toward my Ring camera, snapped the delivery photo, and walked back to his brown truck without realizing he had just become the first witness in a story that would turn my neighborhood upside down. Less than 40 seconds later, another motion alert lit up my screen. I tapped it without much thought, expecting to see a squirrel or maybe one of the neighborhood kids riding their bikes home from school. Instead, I watched Brenda Whitmore stroll across my lawn with the confidence of someone who believed every blade of grass belonged to her. She never looked nervous. She never looked around. She simply smiled, picked up my package with both hands, tucked it under her arm, and walked away as if she were retrieving something she had ordered herself. The afternoon sun reflected off the gold HOA badge clipped to her cardigan, and I could almost smell the expensive perfume she always wore during board meetings, the same floral scent that somehow lingered in the clubhouse long after everyone else had gone home. Most people would have sprinted outside. Most people would have shouted. 6 months earlier, I probably would have done exactly that. But this time I leaned back in my chair, folded my arms, and let the video keep playing until she disappeared around the corner toward her 2-story brick house. Then I smiled for the first time in weeks because the package she had just stolen was the only one I actually wanted her to steal. My name is Ethan Brooks. I'm 38 years old, and I make my living designing cybersecurity systems that catch people who think they're smarter than everyone else. My job has taught me something valuable. Nobody defeats themselves faster than someone convinced they can't get caught. Brenda wasn't stealing because she needed anything inside those boxes. She stole because opening someone else's delivery made her feel powerful. She called it protecting community standards. She called it securing suspicious packages. Around Willow Creek Estates, everyone else simply called it another Brenda incident. The strange part wasn't that she kept taking deliveries. The strange part was that nobody ever stopped her. Neighbors complained, packages disappeared, excuses multiplied, and somehow every conversation ended with a shrug and another HOA newsletter reminding us to respect neighborhood harmony. I respected harmony just fine. I also respected evidence. And hidden inside the cardboard box resting comfortably under Brenda's arm was enough evidence to change everything she believed about getting away with it. She just didn't know it yet. I never planned to become the neighborhood problem solver. After my divorce, I wanted exactly the opposite. My father passed away 2 years earlier, leaving me the house where I grew up, a modest 3-bedroom place tucked into the corner of Willow Creek Estates with a wide front porch and 2 old maple trees that dropped enough leaves every fall to keep me busy for weeks. I spent my weekdays working remotely as a cybersecurity engineer, building systems that protected banks and hospitals from people who believed they could outsmart technology. My office overlooked the front yard, which meant I noticed everything. The mail carrier who always whistled classic country songs. The Amazon drivers who rotated every few weeks. The kids racing bicycles after school. Even the neighborhood cats seemed to follow predictable routes. Patterns have always fascinated me. Computers leave patterns. Networks leave patterns. People leave even bigger ones. Every morning, I brewed the same dark roast coffee, opened my laptop before 7, and watched sunlight crawl across the hardwood floor while quiet filled the house. It was the first place in years that actually felt peaceful. At least it did until Brenda decided my porch belonged to her. The first package disappeared only 3 weeks after I moved in. I assumed the driver had delivered it to the wrong address. The company replaced it without asking questions, and I moved on. A month later, another package vanished. Then another. Soon I found myself memorizing delivery confirmation emails more carefully than grocery lists. Every missing box seemed to contain something ordinary. Printer ink, computer cables, a replacement smoke detector, coffee filters. Nothing expensive enough to make headlines, but enough to become irritating. Then the excuses started spreading through the neighborhood like dandelions after spring rain. One neighbor claimed packages were being stolen by teenagers. Another blamed seasonal delivery workers. Someone insisted raccoons had learned how to drag boxes away, which sounded impressive until I remembered raccoons rarely signed for certified deliveries. Brenda always had an explanation ready before anyone finished asking the question. She spoke with the calm confidence of someone who expected to be believed simply because she chaired the monthly HOA meetings. She reminded everyone that suspicious deliveries threaten neighborhood security and that residents should appreciate people who looked out for the community. Her words sounded polished, but something about the timing never sat right with me. Every missing package somehow turned into another opportunity for Brenda to present herself as the responsible adult keeping order. I stayed quiet, smiled politely during HOA meetings, and thanked neighbors whenever they offered theories. They assumed I had accepted the losses and moved on. They never realized I had already started collecting every delivery timestamp, every camera recording, every shipping notification, and every conversation that mentioned missing packages. While everyone else saw random inconvenience, I saw data waiting to become evidence. Brenda believed she understood how neighborhoods worked. She had no idea she had just become the largest case study I had ever assembled. The more I watched Brenda, the less she looked like an impulsive thief, and the more she resembled someone following a routine polished through years of practice. Every weekday around 4 in the afternoon, she climbed into her white Lexus sport utility vehicle and made one slow lap through Willow Creek Estates. She smiled at dog walkers, waved at retirees watering flower beds, and stopped just long enough to remind someone that their trash needed to be moved before sunset. On the surface, she looked like the perfect volunteer. Underneath that carefully maintained image, something else was happening. My cameras showed her paying unusual attention whenever a delivery truck entered the neighborhood. She never chased every package. She waited. She watched. She picked her moments with remarkable patience. If a homeowner arrived within a minute or two, she simply drove away. If the porch stayed empty, she appeared almost on schedule. The crunch of decorative gravel under her shoes became so familiar through my security recordings that I could identify her before she even entered the frame. Then she added something new. One afternoon, I answered my front door to find a bright orange notice tucked beneath the handle. It claimed repeated package deliveries were creating unnecessary visual clutter that negatively affected community appearance. There was no rule against receiving deliveries. There never had been. Still, the letter carried the official HOA logo and Brenda's signature at the bottom. A few days later, another notice appeared suggesting residents use approved package lockers located nearly a mile from my house. The lockers had been installed by a company owned by one of Brenda's business partners. Suddenly, everything started making sense. This was never about cardboard boxes sitting on porches. Control was the real product. During the next monthly HOA meeting, she stood behind the podium with perfect posture, speaking in the calm voice that always fooled newcomers. She talked about neighborhood safety, increasing online shopping, and the importance of responsible package management. Several neighbors nodded in agreement while sipping weak coffee from foam cups. I looked around the room and noticed something interesting. Every person who praised Brenda had not received a delivery during the meeting's discussion. The people quietly staring at the floor were the same ones whose packages had mysteriously disappeared over the past several months. Fear has a sound. It is not loud. It is the silence of people deciding it is easier to replace a package than challenge someone who enjoys authority. After the meeting, an elderly neighbor named Helen caught up with me near the parking lot. Her hands trembled slightly as she adjusted 2 reusable grocery bags. She leaned closer and lowered her voice until I could barely hear her over the hum of the parking lot lights. She admitted 3 prescription deliveries had vanished from her porch that year. When she asked Brenda about them, Brenda insisted she had moved the boxes somewhere safe, but could never remember exactly where. Helen simply gave up and ordered replacements because she did not want trouble. Watching her walk away into the cool evening air, I realized this was much bigger than my missing deliveries. Brenda had spent years teaching good people that questioning her was more exhausting than accepting the loss. That was exactly the kind of system I had spent my career dismantling, and systems always failed the moment someone finally mapped every piece. By then I had enough recordings to fill an external hard drive, but evidence without timing is just noise. Every evening after work, I sat in my office with the faint smell of fresh coffee drifting across the desk, replaying delivery footage frame by frame until patterns began connecting themselves. Brenda never acted on impulse. She worked from a schedule so consistent it could have been printed on a calendar. On Mondays, she stayed close to the west entrance where the largest number of delivery vans entered the subdivision. Wednesdays, she focused on the streets with retirees who often attended church groups or medical appointments during the afternoon. Fridays, she made slow passes through the entire neighborhood just before sunset, when most people were still fighting traffic on their commute home. She was not guessing. She was studying people the same way I studied network traffic. Then another detail surfaced. Every package she touched shared something in common beyond the shipping label. The boxes looked expensive. She ignored oversized deliveries from warehouse clubs. She ignored grocery orders. She ignored pet food and paper towels. But the moment a box carried branding from an electronics retailer or arrived in sleek premium packaging, she suddenly appeared within minutes. It was almost predictable enough to become mathematical. I created a spreadsheet with delivery times, carrier names, package sizes, weather conditions, and camera angles. After 3 weeks, the numbers confirmed exactly what my instincts had suspected. Brenda targeted appearance, not value. She was gambling on the image of expensive merchandise. That explained why she often walked away disappointed after opening whatever she had taken, yet she never stopped. The possibility of finding something valuable mattered more than the actual contents. That realization changed everything because predictable behavior is the easiest kind to test. Around the same time, I received an electronic message from the HOA informing residents that all suspicious deliveries should be reported directly to the board before contacting shipping companies. The wording sounded official, but it quietly discouraged homeowners from creating outside reports. I read the message twice, then smiled. Someone trying to control information almost always leaves fingerprints. I checked public business records and discovered the package locker company Brenda had promoted was partially managed by a consulting firm connected to her real estate business. Nothing illegal by itself, but enough to explain why she pushed so aggressively for everyone to stop receiving deliveries at home. Convenience for residents had never been the goal. Influence had. The following Saturday morning, I watched from my kitchen window as another delivery truck rolled through the neighborhood. Brenda stepped outside before the driver even reached the first mailbox. She was carrying a clipboard, pretending to inspect landscaping while her eyes tracked every stop the driver made. The smell of freshly cut grass floated through the open window, mixing with the distant hum of lawn mowers, and the entire neighborhood looked perfectly ordinary. That was the dangerous part. Most people only notice dramatic moments. I had learned to notice ordinary ones repeated. Hundreds of times. That was where the truth always hid. Sitting back in my chair, I closed my spreadsheet and opened a new document with a single title across the top. Experiment. Because I was no longer trying to prove what Brenda had already done. I was preparing to discover exactly how far she would go when the perfect opportunity appeared on my front porch. The experiment had to look completely ordinary because ordinary was exactly what Brenda trusted. I ordered a medium-sized shipping box with premium branding that suggested expensive electronics without making any outrageous claims. Inside, there was nothing dangerous, nothing illegal, and nothing designed to embarrass anyone. Instead, I built something far more valuable. I created a documented chain of evidence. A small location tracker rested beneath a layer of protective packing paper. A tiny motion sensor recorded the exact second the box was opened. A harmless ultraviolet tracing powder lightly coated the inner cardboard flaps, completely invisible under normal light, but easily transferred to anyone who handled the contents. Every item had been purchased legally and documented with receipts. Before sealing the package, I photographed every angle, recorded the serial numbers of each device, and synchronized the clocks on every camera covering my property. Then I emailed the complete inventory to my attorney with a time-stamped copy stored in secure cloud storage. If anyone questioned what had happened later, the timeline would already exist long before the package ever reached my porch. The following Tuesday morning, I selected standard shipping instead of expedited delivery because Brenda expected routine more than surprises. By noon, the tracking page showed the familiar message that the driver was only a few stops away. Outside, a light breeze carried the scent of blooming magnolia trees through the neighborhood, while sprinklers clicked rhythmically across freshly cut lawns. It looked like every other peaceful afternoon in Willow Creek Estates, which was exactly the setting I needed. At 5:42 in the afternoon, the delivery notification appeared on my phone. The driver placed the box beside my front. door, took the confirmation photograph, and returned to the truck. I waited without moving from my chair. 43 seconds later, another notification arrived. Motion detected. Brenda entered the frame with the same relaxed confidence she had displayed dozens of times before. She glanced once toward the street, adjusted the clipboard tucked beneath her arm, lifted the package with both hands, and walked calmly back across my lawn. She never hurried because she believed she was untouchable. She never imagined that every second of her routine had already been measured, documented, and anticipated. I resisted every instinct to interrupt her because the moment she crossed my property line, the experiment shifted into its most important phase. The tracker quietly transmitted its first location update. The motion sensor remained silent because the box was still sealed. My cameras continued recording while the afternoon sunlight faded into the warm colors of early evening. Across the street, neighbors watered flowers. Children laughed as basketballs bounced against driveways, and nobody noticed that the most carefully planned test in the history of our homeowners association was unfolding in plain sight. I watched the blinking location indicator move steadily across the digital map until it stopped inside Brenda's house. Then I closed every unnecessary window on my computer, opened a fresh evidence log, entered the exact time down to the second, and waited patiently, because for the first time since moving back into my father's home, I no longer needed Brenda to make a mistake. I simply needed her to continue being herself. The first alert arrived at 6:18 that evening. The motion sensor inside the package registered a gentle shift, followed by complete stillness. Brenda had not opened it immediately. That fit the pattern. She always waited until her garage door was closed and her curtains were drawn before examining anything she took. I watched the live location marker remain fixed inside her house, while the quiet hum of my desktop computer filled the room. Outside, dusk settled over Willow Creek Estates as porch lights flickered on one by one across the street. Somewhere in the distance, a lawn sprinkler clicked back and forth with perfect rhythm, and the scent of fresh mulch drifted through my open window. Everything looked peaceful, almost ordinary, yet every passing minute added another line to a timeline that neither Brenda nor anyone else could rewrite. At exactly 7:03, the second notification appeared. The package had been opened. Not dropped. Not returned. Opened. The sensor recorded the precise second the seal separated from the cardboard. A few moments later, the location tracker shifted deeper into the house before becoming stationary again. I entered every event into my evidence log without emotion. Date, time, device confirmation, cross-reference with camera footage. My attorney had once told me that facts become powerful when they are boring because boring facts are difficult to argue with. I intended to make this case as boring as possible. The following morning, I drove to a neighborhood coffee shop instead of working from home. I wanted my routine to remain predictable. Brenda expected frustration. She expected another resident knocking on her door, demanding answers. Instead, she saw me leave at the usual hour carrying nothing more than a travel mug and my laptop bag. She waved as I backed out of the driveway. I smiled and waved back. Her expression suggested mild surprise, almost disappointment. She was waiting for conflict and found none. That was exactly what I wanted. Over the next 2 days, the tracker continued transmitting from the same location inside her property. No attempt was made to return the package. No message appeared in my mailbox claiming she had moved it somewhere safe. No electronic mail arrived from the HOA discussing suspicious deliveries. Silence can reveal just as much as conversation, especially when someone normally has an explanation ready for everything. On Friday afternoon, another piece of the puzzle quietly fell into place. Helen called to thank me for helping her configure the security camera I had installed above her porch earlier that week. While we spoke, she casually mentioned that Brenda had walked across her driveway twice that morning after another delivery arrived. Nothing disappeared because Helen had been home, but the behavior matched every observation already sitting in my files. It was never about helping neighbors. It was about opportunity. I closed the call, updated my notes, and leaned back in my chair. The experiment had already answered the question I designed it to test. Brenda had willingly taken possession of property that was clearly addressed to someone else, transported it into her home, opened it, and kept it without making any effort to notify the owner. She believed the story ended there because every previous incident had ended exactly that way. She did not realize that, for the first time, every decision she made had quietly become part of a complete, verified timeline that was about to connect with evidence far beyond my own front porch. By the beginning of the following week, the investigation had quietly outgrown my own property. My timeline was complete, my recordings were organized, and every digital record had been backed up in 3 separate locations. Instead of rushing toward a confrontation, I scheduled a meeting with my attorney and handed over everything from the first missing delivery to the most recent package that Brenda had carried into her house. We spent nearly 2 hours reviewing timestamps, shipping confirmations, security footage, tracker logs, and photographs. Every piece fit together without contradiction. When we finished, he closed the folder, looked across the conference table, and said something I had been hoping to hear. There was enough documented evidence to move forward through the proper legal channels without relying on assumptions or emotional arguments. That single sentence changed the direction of everything. For months, Brenda had controlled the story because she always spoke first. Now the evidence would speak before either of us did. Over the next several days, additional neighbors came forward after quietly learning that someone was finally documenting the missing deliveries. Helen was the first. Then came a retired firefighter who had lost replacement smoke detectors. A young couple produced electronic receipts for baby supplies that had never reached their front porch. Another neighbor shared security footage showing Brenda approaching a delivery while pretending to inspect landscaping along the sidewalk. None of these incidents alone proved a larger pattern, but together they painted a remarkably consistent picture. Every statement was written, signed, and dated. Every video was copied in its original format. Every receipt matched carrier records. Watching the collection grow felt less like building a complaint and more like assembling a puzzle that had been scattered across the neighborhood for years. The atmosphere inside Willow Creek Estates slowly began to change. People who once avoided conversations about missing packages suddenly compared delivery dates and remembered details they had dismissed as unimportant. Someone recalled Brenda insisting on signing for a shipment that was never addressed to her. Another remembered finding an open box placed back on a porch without explanation. Even the delivery drivers started noticing that one particular resident seemed unusually interested in every truck entering the subdivision. None of them accused anyone directly. They simply described what they had personally seen. Facts accumulated with surprising speed once people realized they were no longer standing alone. Meanwhile, Brenda behaved exactly as she always had. She smiled during HOA meetings, reminded homeowners about landscaping rules, and distributed cheerful newsletters celebrating community pride. The confidence that had protected her for so long became the final piece of evidence because she never imagined the investigation had expanded beyond a single homeowner. She believed I was still chasing one missing package when, in reality, the entire timeline now stretched across multiple households, multiple delivery companies, and months of carefully preserved records. Sitting in my office one quiet evening, I watched the neighborhood settle into another peaceful sunset as porch lights illuminated one house after another. The same streets looked unchanged, yet everything beneath the surface had shifted. For the first time, the story no longer depended on what Brenda claimed had happened. It depended on what? Dozens of independent records all revealed together, and the picture they formed was far more complete than she could possibly imagine. The turning point arrived on a crisp Tuesday morning when everything left the private world of security cameras and spreadsheets and entered official hands. My attorney submitted the complete evidence package, including delivery records, signed statements, synchronized timestamps, photographs, and video files that documented months of consistent behavior. No dramatic speeches were necessary because the documents spoke with remarkable clarity. Within days, investigators contacted several homeowners whose names appeared in the timeline. Each conversation uncovered another detail that matched the existing record instead of contradicting it. One remembered a package marked as delivered that mysteriously vanished before dinner. Another produced archived camera footage they had forgotten existed. A retired couple found electronic mail confirming replacement shipments for items they had assumed were permanently lost. Every new piece fit naturally beside the others, creating a picture that was impossible to dismiss as coincidence. The neighborhood that had once accepted missing deliveries as an unfortunate inconvenience suddenly realized the incidents had followed the same pattern for far longer than anyone imagined. Rumors faded because facts replaced them. One quiet afternoon, several official vehicles entered Willow Creek Estates without lights or unnecessary attention. Neighbors glanced through their windows, curious but respectful, while conversations paused across neatly trimmed front yards. I remained inside my office, watching sunlight stretch across the hardwood floor exactly as it had on countless workdays before. The difference was that this time I was not collecting evidence. I was watching the process unfold exactly as it should. Later that evening, several homeowners received notifications that property believed to belong to them had been identified during the investigation. Some recovered unopened deliveries they had replaced months earlier. Others were reunited with sentimental items that held far more emotional value than financial worth. Helen called me with tears in her voice after learning that a family photo album she thought had disappeared forever had finally been located. She kept thanking me, but I reminded her that the evidence belonged to everyone who had chosen to tell the truth and preserve their records. Justice had not arrived because of one person. It arrived because enough ordinary people refused to ignore an extraordinary pattern. The following HOA board meeting felt unlike any gathering I had attended before. The usual confidence and carefully managed routines were gone, replaced by quiet professionalism and a renewed focus on transparency. Interim leadership announced new procedures requiring independent oversight for community decisions involving resident property, while volunteers proposed practical improvements for package security that respected homeowners instead of controlling them. Nobody applauded. Nobody celebrated another person's misfortune. The atmosphere carried something much healthier than revenge. It carried relief. As the meeting ended, neighbors lingered outside beneath the warm glow of parking lot lights, speaking more openly than they had in years. For the first time since returning to my father's house, Willow Creek Estates felt like a community instead of a collection of people keeping their heads down. Walking back toward my front porch that evening, I noticed a delivery resting beside my door exactly where the driver had left it. No one had touched it. No one had moved it. The cardboard looked completely ordinary, but after everything that had happened, it represented something far greater than another shipment. It represented trust beginning to return, one quiet delivery at a time. The package sitting on my porch that evening was smaller than most, wrapped in plain brown cardboard with nothing about it that suggested it was worth a second glance. I picked it up, unlocked the front door, and carried it into the same house where this entire journey had quietly begun months earlier. The familiar scent of dark roast coffee still lingered in the kitchen. The maple trees outside still rustled in the evening breeze, and for the first time since moving back after my father passed away, the silence felt peaceful instead of uncertain. I set the box on the dining room table and opened it carefully. Inside was the vintage wristwatch that had belonged to my father, the one I had ordered after finding an identical model from a collector across the country. It was never about the price. It never had been. I fastened the worn leather band around my wrist and smiled as the second hand began its steady movement. Time had become the quiet theme of this entire story. Time spent watching instead of reacting. Time spent documenting instead of arguing. Time spent allowing facts to grow stronger than accusations. Looking back, I realized the package Brenda carried away that Thursday afternoon had never been the real trap. The real trap was her belief that nobody was paying attention. She expected frustration because frustration was temporary. She expected complaints because complaints faded. She expected people to replace what they lost and move on with their lives. What she never expected was patience. Patience leaves records. Patience builds timelines. Patience turns isolated incidents into undeniable patterns. A few weeks later, the neighborhood held its annual community picnic in the small park near the clubhouse. Families gathered beneath shade tents while children played catch across the open field. Delivery trucks rolled through the streets several times that afternoon, leaving packages on front porches exactly where they belonged. Nobody rushed outside in panic. Nobody quietly carried away boxes that were not theirs. It was such an ordinary sight that most people never noticed it. Yet I found myself appreciating how extraordinary normal life can feel after trust has been restored. Helen stopped by with homemade cookies and laughed about finally feeling comfortable ordering gifts for her grandchildren again. The young couple down the street told me their latest delivery had waited untouched on their porch for nearly 6 hours until they came home from work. Even the drivers seemed more relaxed, waving as they completed their routes before heading toward the next neighborhood. Willow Creek Estates had not become perfect. No neighborhood ever does. But it had become honest, and honesty is far easier to protect than fear. Sometimes people ask whether all the planning was worth the effort for something as simple as a missing package. I always tell them the same thing. The cardboard box was never the real issue. Trust was. Once trust disappears, every delivery, every neighbor, and every quiet afternoon begins to feel uncertain. Restoring that trust required something stronger than anger. It required evidence, restraint, and the willingness to let the truth unfold at its own pace. Every time I hear another delivery truck stop in front of my house, I glance through the window, see the package waiting exactly where it was placed, and remember that the strongest form of justice is rarely the loudest. It is the quiet certainty that sooner or later, the truth always arrives exactly where it belongs.